Hi there, welcome to Towle Talks. Today we actually start using the MVC Architecture Model View Controller, and we get into how to use CodeIgniter's controllers and a little bit into the views. For view, we have model, which deals with getting information to and from the database. It's really all it's worried about. It might return the data in a usable form for the controller, but that's about all the work it's going to do. The controller is going to deal with the user calls and the form data. It's going to do all the business logic for the web application. It's going to act kind of like a traffic cop between the model and the view. So it's going to go get information from the model, send information to the model, get information from the model, and when it's all done with the business logic, it's going to send it out to the view. And the view is going to deal with the graphical representation of the information to the user. And all of the cosmetics and stuff is going to happen here. So there's several ways to approach learning MVC, but the easiest way is to start interacting with it on a get-go. So with that said, we're going to start with the controller. And the reason we're starting with the controller is the user is going to actually indirectly interact with the controller by calling the URL. So we're going to get into how to call the controller first, how the URLs work in CodeIgniter, and then we'll move on to how the views work after that. So controllers, again, kind of we just said this, but they handle input from the users, and they can send and receive information from the models, and they can send information to the views. So today we're going to start working with controllers, and we're going to take it piece by piece. So the first piece we're going to talk about is controllers take the URL requests from the users. These contain parameters and post get data. We're not going to worry about post get right now. We're going to focus on the parameters in the URL and the URL form. The URL form is going to be different than it is in a normal web environment, so you're going to pay special attention to how the formatting works here. So the user is going to request or click on a link or something, and that's going to trigger a controller and a function. So we're going to work on this part first. Today we're going to talk about controllers. I'm going to break this up into a couple parts, probably two parts actually. And we're just going to do a basic controller first, and then we're going to get into going from the controller to the view page. Now, first of all, let's look at our file directory here real quick. That's not the file directory. Okay, there's the file directory. So remember, when we use CodeIgniter, we need to just extract that folder we downloaded. We can rename it, and I just renamed it L2-1, and it's got to be inside our web root. Now, one thing I didn't really mention before, this folder is going to be an individual web application. So I double click that. I have applications, system user guide. We talked about this a little bit. Let's go to application right now, and then let's go look at the folders here. So right off the bat, we're not going to worry about anything at the moment. We're just going to go to controllers. Remember, controllers are the thing that you have to talk to. Basically, to make an interactable web form, you have to have a controller. I personally feel, as far as a design perspective, it's better to start with models. But because you can't actually directly interact with models, we might as well start with controllers and then go to views and do models last. So it's interesting. I'm going to be presenting this in a kind of reverse order of what, or close to a reverse order of what I would normally design it as. So if we go to controllers, all of our controllers, are going to go inside here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new PHP file. I called it demo controller. Now, mind the capitalization. Here's one of those convention things. So again, it's going to be inside the controller folder, and we need to have a name of our file with, in this case, first letter is capitalized, and then everything else is lowercase .php. And I'll explain why this is in a moment. You can ignore the stuff that, or you can ignore everything else. I actually made two models here, but we'll just do the demo controller first, and we'll open this up with Notepad++. Now, Notepad++, or here it is. So Notepad++, here's our file. All we're going to do is we're going to have a PHP file open and close, and then we're going to have a class. So right away, everything we talked about from the class lecture is going to start coming back. Here, it's important that this name, demo controller, is the same name as your class. That is absolutely necessary. Here, we're going to extend, so we're going to inherit CI_controller. And although I don't believe it, unless you're using certain things, it's not necessary, but I would just go ahead and make a constructor function and then do parent : __construct and call the parent constructor, because that way, if you do have to call this for some functionalities, you may as well do it. Also, if anything, you want to load any libraries or modules or helper functions, we can do it here. I'm loading this load helper URL helper, and this is loading a helper file called URL helper_helper.php, and it's got some different functionality we'll talk about in a moment that's very useful. So this is just a basic class, nothing really special about it. I'm going to come back to these two functions. So, I mean, in fact, there's nothing really exciting going on here about this, but let's just focus on index at the moment, and I'll come back to these two. Now, index is going to be the default function that gets called if you do not specify a function. So this is the basic function call for the controller. And then what I did here was I want to demo the difference between, in fact, let me add this right now. I need to add some breakpoints. No, there's an easier way of doing this, but. So last time I taught this class, I mentioned this as a side comment and no one picked it up, so I'm going to blatantly mention it now. With this URL helper, we have a function called site URL. Site URL is going to give you all the front, like the URL up to the part where you choose your controller. So it's really useful when you're making links to other pages and other controller functions inside your web application. Here I then state the controller and the function and then the parameter. We're going to talk about this in a moment, but you'll see that the URL is going to change a little bit from what we're used to. This will just print out the base URL with nothing on it, and this will print out the site URL, which isn't quite as useful, but if you need to access something that's on your server but not necessarily part of this application, you could use site URL. So I strongly recommend using this. You can also use this once you load it. You can use this helper, I believe, in the web and the views, and so you can use this to create anchor tags if you need to. But I strongly recommend using this. Otherwise, I've got to figure out, you know, I have to either do one of two things. I have to say echo, and I got to figure out, okay, is it one directory back, or is it two directories back, or do it, do I have to say localhost? But if I do localhost, it won't work when I try to deploy it. So it gets really confusing very fast. So site URL help is a great function just to help you out. So let's just see what's going on here real quick, and then we'll get into what I'm doing here and kind of what I was trying to demonstrate. We'll save this. We'll open up our, this is the other one, so we'll just open up. So here's how this works. First of all, localhost L2-1 and then the index.php. This is the index.php that's in the top level of my web document. So this is this index.php. After that comes, I'm going to write this out in BNF notation, controller, then the function I want to call in that controller, and then a parameter. And I can have as many parameters as I want. And you won't always send parameters this way, but you can, etc., etc. So this is the format after the index.php. Now you can change this with routes. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. But by default, after you do the web root and the index.php, then you type in the controller, you type in the function name, and you type in how many parameters you need. So now the controller, we don't need .php. we just need to specify the name. So it was demo controller, but notice I don't need the .php here. Now if I do not specify a function, it will take me to the index by default. This is a basic function call for the controller. Here is the site or the base URL, and then this could be like a hypothetical anchor. It's not, but I could make this an anchor. I could click this. I could go to another function in my controller. Here's the site URL, and here is the base URL. Sorry, I think I have it backwards. This is the. Let's get this confused. Sorry. So this is the site URL with the demo controller. This is the base URL. This is the site URL by default. I can also specify my function index. And it obviously takes me to the same place. So now, if we go back to our file here real quick, let's just see something interesting now. Well, I have, let's not do that, these two functions. One takes one parameter, one takes two parameters, and just echoes the parameters out. So now if I want to get over here, I'm going to go back to my website, and I'll say func1, and then I need to give it a parameter, so I can call it Bob. I hit enter. The parameter is Bob. So here, this is the controller file name, this is the function name, this is the parameter. I can also do this with more than one parameter, so parameter 2, function 2, Bob, and then 44 or 55, and the parameters are Bob and 44. So it's important you understand how URLs are working. After the index.php, it's controller, function, and then a parameter list. You won't always send information in this way. This is useful for things like links. If you need to set up a link, say, okay, I want to call this page, and then send in this value, you can do this. Usually, as far as user inputs, you're going to be using a post. Also, this is not get. Okay, so I don't want people getting confused. Just because the parameters are in the URL, the get syntax is actually, if I remember correctly, like that. So this is the get, which I'm not using any get, so it doesn't make sense. This is CodeIgniter's parameters. So don't get confused. Just because the parameters are in the URL, it is not a get or a post for that matter. This is just one way to get data into the controller. Generally, the user will use forms to get information into the controller. So going back here, there's two things we need to talk about. First of all, so I have this site echoed out. Let's just, for the heck of it, let's just do this. We'll say inc equals that, and we'll say echo a. So this is what I was saying is it's nice to set up a fairly easy anchor tag. I know there's an easier way of doing this. I think I can just put the value inside it, but I'm sorry. Inc. So now this will be the site URL I want to go to, and this will set it up for me so I'll have a hyperlink. Go to function 1. And so this is an easy way to set up an anchor tag. Again, I don't have to, in this situation I'm using localhost, but in a deployed situation I'm not going to be using a localhost, and I cannot even specify or be 100% sure I know what my IP address is going to be. So this site URL is really handy, and again I recommend using it. So now if I go back to my index, again I don't have to specify the function. I could write it out, or I could just leave it blank and it'll just take the index by default. Except that my things. So here, go to function 1. If I look down here, you'll see my URL at the bottom left of the screen, index.php controller func1 100. So I click that, the parameter is 100. So that's an easy way to create URLs. Now, another problem is I'm breaking a cardinal rule of controllers, and I'm doing it just to simply explain what's happening. But notice right here, I'm echoing things out to the screen. I'm echoing out to the HTML document. I never want to write anything out from the controller. That is the job of the view. So the next part we're going to have to talk about is how to get information to the view and how to use the view to present the data. So now that we have controllers set up, we have to figure out what to do. Because remember, we can't print out of the controller. So we need to call the views, and we need to be able to send information to the views. So that'll be the next thing we're going to work on. Now, remember views. Views take in data from the controller. They present data to the user in a graphical form, and all cosmetic issues of the web page are going to be dealt here. Unfortunately, when you make a web application, this is 90% of the critique you're going to get is going to be visual. It's really a shame because the visual is probably the last and the least difficult to set up, especially if you've organized your CSS and your web page in a good fashion. You should be able to change things fairly quickly. Unfortunately, this is the thing that people see. They're not going to see your back-end model or your controller or your awesome design database. All they're going to see is a view. So unfortunately, the view is probably the least important as far as the programming goes, but sadly the most important when it comes to actually, selling the audience on the web application. Just for a heads up, this class is not going to get into the web and the HCI of web applications. We're not going to worry about human-computer interactions. There's plenty of tutorials online. You can use Bootstrap if you need to. You can make your own CSS, and there's a lot of things you can do. So we're not going to focus on the usability or the graphical user interface component as much. Basically, we've talked about this leg of MVC, the controller, or the user invokes the controller, and then notice this arrow is one directional, so we can send information from the controller to the view. The view does not talk back to the controller directly, but we can send information from the controller and send it to the view, and the view will then present it graphically to the user. We can actually call several views from this controller. It doesn't have to be one view, but this is kind of the current branch we're working on with the MVC architecture. So creating views. So like I said, last time I broke a big rule. I did a big no-no. I printed stuff out from the controller. I never ever want to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a new controller just so we don't get things confused. Let's go back to our application. Again, this is inside our web application folder that we unzipped. I'm going to go to controllers. Then I'm going to make a new file. I called it view demo. Again, capital V. Everything else is lowercase. And this is going to be another controller file. So we look at view demo here. And now we're going to start taking advantage, if you will, of the code MVC architecture. So here for a view, class view demo, V is capital. Remember, the view demo has to match. Extend CI controller, so we're inheriting controller. I have a constructor, and I call the parent constructor just to make sure I initialize all the information on the CodeIgniter side. Again, there are certain times you don't have to do this, but it's just, in my opinion, best practice just to have this in, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you don't have it and your web application is not working. And then in this situation, it's going to be kind of just a public function index. Again, index that primary function we talked about. And here I'm going to actually load views. Now, different MVCs do this a little bit differently. CodeIgniter, I can load all the views I want. Remember, the view is about loading the graphical components. So what you can do with CodeIgniter, which you can't always do on other MVCs, is you can break it up. So what I did is I created, maybe I want to create a header, a nav, and a footer, and I want the same header, same nav bar, and same footer for all of my pages, but obviously in between that, this is the stuff I want that's going to be different. So how do we get this to happen? Well, first of all, ignoring this real quick, we'll come back to this code. Let's go back to our file structure here. Going back to our web root, we'll go to Application, and then we see Views. The CodeIgniter is going to look in here for all of your views. So if your view is not inside here, it's not going to work. You do not have to put CSS inside here. In fact, I'll try to do another lecture about where to link CSS. You can actually put it on the web root. I think that's the easiest, if I remember correctly, but we can cross that bridge later. But yeah, so here we have just you won't have templates and you won't have page one. You'll have everything else. So what I did is I created a folder. Now we can create subfolders here. So templates. Remember, mind the capitalization because that's going to be important. And what I did is I created 3 different files: footer, header, and nav.php. Again, if I'm going too fast, you can slow down and pause the video. Here's Notepad++. So my header is basically going to be the open HTML tag, the head tag with my title, and then the body. I'm not going to close the body, nor am I going to finish or do anything else. And I probably should do my metadata up here too. I'm being bad. So, but this way I'm going to reuse this head, and we'll show you how to change the title in a moment, for all my different web pages in my web application. That's one thing that's nice about CodeIgniter, is I can do that. Also, on a side note, remember, one of the worst things you can do as a web developer or web application developer is have inconsistencies in your pages. If I'm perusing through your web application and then the layout completely changes, the buttons move, the whole thing changes, I'm going to hold your web application to great suspect, or as the kids call it nowadays, sus. Now, so this is my HTML head. Notice there actually isn't even any PHP in here right now. Go to nav PHP. Here is, I'm going to have my main title. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have this. I'm going to call this view first. Then I'm going to call nav. So this whole thing is basically going to go underneath here. Oops. And I have my main title. Again, we'll talk about how to change this in a moment. And then I have my nav bar field. The nav bar goes here. I can deal with that later. And that's all I'm going to worry about in this file. And then, if you remember right, for our templates, and these are all going to go underneath the template folder. That's the wrong folder. Then I have templates footer. And a footer is basically going to have a footer section. And then close the body, close the HTML, and we'll call it done. So, and in my page one right now, I just have a section with H2 that says this is my main page, and close the section. That's all I have for my page. So you can again pause the video if I went too fast. I'm sure I went too fast. So we can look at different things here. Alright, so now what this is going to do, this load, anytime I have this load, I'm loading another module. I can be loading this load module, I can be loading this load library, this load helper, this load view, but whatever I'm loading something external. Notice I'm not actually loading the URL helper here, but that's okay. So here, this load view, this is saying I'm going to look in the view folder. It's going to be under the subfolder templates, and I'm going to load header. Notice I do not need the .php. So as long as my capitalization is correct, I should load the header, the nav, then I'll load page one. Remember, page one is not inside the templates. So if I go back to my folder here, I go back to views, it's directly underneath views, and this is page one.php. You say, well, is that a good thing? Probably not. It depends on how big your application is. If I have a very, like a enterprise class application, I'm going to have this broken out into a file structure. But for a very small application, having a templates folder and then having maybe 5 to 10 main pages outside, that's not going to be a big deal. So again, probably best practice would be to have like some sort of file structure for where your pages are going. But for this, it's just proof of concept. So I'm just going to load this page and load the footer. So let's look at what happens when I do this. So here, remember it's index.php/the controller, which is view demo, and I could put index, or I don't have to put index for it because index is default. Now I get main title, the nav bar goes here, and this is the main page, and this is the copyright and stuff. And also notice my title in the tab is my title. I can also right click and view source, view page source, and you see that my HTML has been stuck together, and it basically is taking those 4 files and put them all together as I'd expect. So that is the first thing about views. What's actually going to happen on the controller side is I'm going to deal with data or whatever I need to do up here, then I'm just going to call my views and let the views present the data. Now the next question is, remember there's a little arrow that goes from the controller back to the view. How do we get data to the view? For example, right now I've hard-coded my title, and then right here I've had main title again. So that's kind of crappy. So this, again, different MVCs are going to do this a little bit differently, but I'll give you a hint. I think most of them use an associative array. So we're going to do this. We're going to say data equals array. We'll say data title equals, what should we call it? My cool web application. Later on in the semester, I go with this like little monster card tutorial thing, but I don't have a good running theme for our tutorials right now. So we're going to say again, associative array. The key is title, and then the value is my cool web application. So this is all, again, associative array. This is important you understand the associative array. It's just like a normal array, except instead of a number, it's a string. I'm going to pass this array in as a second parameter to both my header and my nav. I can actually pass it into all of them if I need, but I'll show you why I'm only doing the header and the nav right now. So I'm passing this associative array into the header and the nav. Now, here's the magic. Nothing at my left sleeve, nothing at my right sleeve. If I go over here, I can activate a PHP tag, and right here I can say echo title. Wait, what? Seriously? It's that simple? Yes. So when I pass, except it's capital T. I'll make the lowercase t. There. So when I pass this in, the key is going to become a variable in my view. So I don't have to worry about data anymore, but the key is going to become a variable that holds the value. So we'll save that. We'll go to nav, and here we'll do the same. In fact, we'll just copy that actually. So again, the key of my associative array will become a variable in my view that holds the value that the associative array held. And I think this was done by CodeIgniter just to make it a little nicer, and so instead of having to do like type out the associative array all the time, you can just reference it by the key or the variable and then give it and it will print out the value. So it saves on typing a little bit. I think this was CodeIgniter's attempt at kind of matching templating like Smarty a little bit. So we save it, we go back here, let's go back to here, this, we'll just hit enter again. So now you see my cool web applications changed and my cool web applications changed here. So now I can send information in from the controller, from the controller to the views. And so now my views can dynamically change based on whatever business logic has happened in my controller. So that's how you get information from the controller to the view. So for review, we've learned how to make a controller, we learned the URL structure for the CodeIgniter, we learned how to send parameters into the controller without using post or get, and we learned how to make views. We've also learned how to send data from the controllers to those views. So here's the problem of the day. We're going to create a web page that lets the user just press a submit button called play. This play button will just invoke a PHP controller function. The controller function is going to play the random number game, so we're going to have two random numbers between 1 and 20. If you can multiply, divide, add, or subtract, then the player wins, otherwise the player loses. You're going to pass the two numbers and whether or not they played or whether or not they won to the view. The view is not going to do any part of the game logic, nor is the controller going to print any information out. I want you to try to incorporate CSS to the view. You may have to look this one up. And then the controller must not print anything to the screen, and the view must not have any game logic in it. Thank you for watching Towle Talks. Now hopefully you understand how controllers interact with views and how controllers get invoked from the URL calls. Thanks for watching, and until next time, cheers. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a comment or a like below. And again, thank you.